بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. أنزلناه في ليلة القدر وما أدراك ما ليلة القدر. ليلة القدر خير من ألف شهر. تنزل ملائكة والروح فيها بإذن ربهم من كل أمر. سلام هي حتى مطلع الفجر. صدق الله العظيم. It's a pleasure to be here. Today is March 7th, 2021, and I'll be speaking to you on the topic of the second message of Islam, solving the problems of the 21st century, how it solves the problems of the 21st century. I hope to talk a little bit about the perspective of Islam that needs to be adopted, understanding Islam as an ideology and methodology and not purely as a faith. And then I hope to talk in some detail about the ideological aspects of Islam that are applicable, and also the methodology, particularly of the Holy Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, which is also necessary for us to solve our problems at this moment in time. And then hopefully end up talking a little bit about some of the specifics of what that looks like. I'll start by welcoming everyone that's here. And I want to mention that I've been particularly excited recently because I was able to connect with some of my high school classmates. And I went to high school in San Francisco, and my high school was one of the diverse high schools in the country. It was about a third white, a third black, and a third Asian Pacific Islander. We had 3,300 students in the school. And I played sports at that school, and one of the sports I played was basketball. And so some of my old teammates, and I say old because I graduated in 1971, got together in San Francisco. They invited me up there, but I didn't go because of COVID. But they had a reunion at the house of one of the players, and I was able to connect with them on the phone. They've all done very well with their lives. Most of them are in retirement. The only one that isn't retired is a physician, a medical doctor. And I had a really joyous time speaking with them. And one of them married his high school sweetheart, and they've been married, I think they told me, oh my God, 35 years and or more. And we had a good time, and it brought back to me, the importance of connections that you make in life, and how certain connections with other human beings that you make stand out. And that time I spent in high school was very important in my own development. And I spoke before on the fact that I was an athlete, and it was my experiences in high school, though I was really enjoying the sports, I was enjoying the camaraderie with those particular teammates. Philip Ching's parents, both of them who've passed now, would invite the team over to their home for a meal. Many weekends after games. And we just bonded at this round dinner table in the home of these Chinese Americans. with this team where you had African Americans, Asian Americans, white Americans, invite the team over, immigrants, and people who have lived in this country for generations, all around this table, sharing and connecting with one another at just a human level. And so that's, to me, is a metaphor of what life should be like. Traveling to the Sudan in 1977 was an attempt to search for that type of camaraderie outside of sports. And when I met Sudanese students at the University of Hawaii, I was attracted by their behavior, the way they carried themselves, and particularly the way in which they interacted with other people. I saw in that interaction what I believe to be proper human interaction. Politeness, compassion and concern for one another, generosity of spirit. And so when Salman invited me to come to the Sudan in 1977, I jumped at the opportunity and did so. And in my encounter with Fikr Jamhuriya, the ideology of Ustaz articulated as the second message of Islam, I discovered much more than I bargained for. So not only did I find the Sudanese students that I met to be a microcosm of Sudanese people in general, who are exceptional human beings, but I also found this teacher who had an understanding of Islam that addressed the critical problems being faced by human beings at an individual level and at a societal level. And he did it in a manner that was intellectual, yet at the same time, you were fully emotionally involved in the process as well through your worship. And so it was a complete experience. It was an intellectual experience and it was an emotional experience, and it was fulfilling at both of those levels. And in the course of that, I started to reflect on my own understanding of the world, and I realized that some of the ideas that I had about life needed to be readjusted. One of the things that needed to be readjusted in particular was the notion of saying what you think, having the courage to do so, and doing what you say. And so I tried my best to be a more sincere and consistent person. And in doing that, I think I was able to get more out of my experience as a student under Ustaz Mahmoud. But the things that attracted me to his ideology really had to do with those two aspects. An idea about how individuals can improve themselves and become more self-realized and conscious, and learn how to interact with one another in a more humanistic manner, in a kinder, more generous, more friendly, more compassionate manner. And at the same time, articulating the notion that religion, if it's to solve our problems, has to not only address the needs of the individual, but it needs to address the community at large, in the sense that during the time when religious people, particularly mystics, devout people living in monasteries, during that era of Christianity, Judaism, Islam, people tended to get as close to God and as far away from humanity as they possibly could, because humanity wasn't ready for some of the ideas that the mystics of the different religions had understood and were asserting. And so there was a notion that at a certain level, people had to separate themselves from the community in order to be religious. Ustaz Mahmoud said that time is over. There was a time when that was true, but we've reached another era of human development. And it's time for people who are children of God and are following the path of the prophets as best they can, to bring their knowledge and their examples into the community, because the community now, more than ever, is in need of what religion has to offer. And again, I'm not talking about faith here. I'm talking about religion based on certain principles. One of the principles that Ustaz talks about in terms of organizing the community is the idea, is a reflection on the term civilization, asking us, what is it? And in his discourse on it, he asked the question, is civilization morality? And answers that question in the affirmative. Yes, it is. Because in order to be civilized, people need to be moral. But where does that need to be moral and that practice of morality come from? It comes from exercising your freedom with discretion, behaving in a conscious manner in how you exercise your freedom, in the context of an understanding that you do so because you are always in the presence of absolute individual freedom, which is our Creator. And so this idea of thinking of religion itself as being, in essence, morality, and then asking ourselves, is there a difference between civilization and material progress? Because I hadn't clearly distinguished those things in my mind. Ustaz Mahmoud says material progress is the base. And religion or morality is the peak. So at the base is material progress, at the peak is civilization. And we said that civilization is in fact morality. This notion allows one to self-reflect on what we consider to be civilization in the 21st century. Many times we think of, say, the Western world as being civilized. If it is, then we have to ask ourselves, to what degree is it moral? where is the morality in this Western civilization? Ustaz Mahmoud says a truly civilized person doesn't confuse the end with the means. The end is civilization. Material progress is a means to that end. It's not the end in itself. So one could be materially progressive and advanced and uncivilized. So this idea of connecting the notion of morality to civilization is critical. He also says that a person who is civilized doesn't confuse the end with the means, doesn't sacrifice the end for the means, so doesn't preoccupy themselves with material progress and forget that the end is to be a moral, civilized human being, a moral human being before God, and doesn't confuse being materially advanced with being civilized or moral. That distinction is so critical and so profound. That distinction leads one to reflect on their relationship with their Creator, and also their discretion in exercising their freedom in the context of standing before their Creator at every instant, night and day. So this concept of being a moral and civilized person is I think, core when we talk about what the world needs at this moment. It needs not just democratic institutions, not just egalitarian principles and philosophies, not just high courts of justice, but it needs people to understand that the political system, the judicial system, the economic system are all means to the end of becoming more moral human beings. And until we understand that, we are confusing the means with the end, or sacrificing the end for the means. And so this is the core, really, what I want to talk about. And Ustaz, then, this is all in the second message of Islam. You can read it in Arabic or translate it into several different languages. I access it through English. But in the second message of Islam, Ustaz Mahmoud starts elaborating on morality. And he tells us that the Quran states that to the Holy Prophet, you are of high moral character. This is our Creator identifying our Prophet as being of high moral character. When Sayyidina Aisha was asked about the morality of the Holy Prophet, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, she said his morality is the Quran. His morality is the Quran, that revelation from our Creator through him. Think about who he was. he is given the Quran to recite at the time when he's illiterate. When he's being asked to recite the Quran, he is conscious of the fact that he's illiterate and hesitant. But he's told that your vessel is capable of delivering this message. Recite. And he does. His morality was the Quran. This fact is what ties Islam as understood by Ustaz Mahmoud and articulated in the second message of Islam as an ideology that is needed at this moment in time. You know, we can ask ourselves, why do we need a prophet after Jesus? What did the Holy Prophet Muhammad bring? He certainly didn't bring principles beyond what Jesus brought. Jesus articulated the highest moral principles. Love thy God with all thy heart, with all thy soul, and all thy mind. Where do you go from there? Love those who despitefully use you. Where do you go from there? Love thy neighbor as thyself, and so on and so on and so on. But what the Holy Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon them both, brings is a methodology called Sunnah. And by adhering to that methodology, his personal worship, not his Sunnah as it's often defined as everything that he said and he did, because of course, like all the prophets, he came at a particular time. And at the time he came, we know the state of humanity at that time. I don't have to talk about it here. It is not the state that we're in now. Examples, if you need them, are, think about the idea of being so ashamed of having a daughter that you bury her alive. You dig a hole and throw her in it and kick sand on top of it. That's problem solving in the 7th century. How am I going to avoid being shamed by people taking my daughters? Because that was the practice, stealing young girls from people and taking them as something called a wife as a cultural practice. Islam came at that time. So some of the things certainly that the Holy Prophet Muhammad had to say and do at that time was to help establish Islam on the Arabian Peninsula when he arrived 1400 years ago. So not everything that he taught and everything that he did is the Sunnah in terms of Sunnah as understood as his personal relationship with God, as opposed to as a messenger, which is his relationship with the community. He did certain things as a messenger and he did them perfectly. And he had a perfect relationship with Allah, as far as I know. And that's his Sunnah, as Ustaz Mahmoud is distinguishing. That Sunnah is a methodology. Ustaz calls it a psychotherapeutic methodology that allows you to clean your mind and calm your heart, and therefore be able to exercise your freedom with discretion. Think what you want, say what you think, and do what you say, with the provision that what you say and what you do does not harm other people. That is Ustaz Mahmoud's definition of freedom as understood through his reinterpretation of verses of the Quran. That interpretation of freedom is necessary in the 21st century. Freedom is not and cannot be for individuals to do whatever they want. not wear a mask during a pandemic because I'm a free person. You mean you're willing to kill me to exercise your freedom? Which one of us is free in that situation? If you become a murderer and I become dead, which one of us is free? Right? And at a moral level, it's outrageous and egregious for people to be professing freedom and not being able to think it through and define it. Ustaz suggests that we think of freedom as the exercising our using discretion in our exercise of it. Yeah, say what's on your mind. Do what you say. But with the provision that what you say and what you do doesn't harm other people. When you reach that point, you're moving into chaos and away from freedom. Now, we live in a country in the West, which considers itself one of the great democracies in the world. And people think that an exercise of their freedom is to storm the Capitol of the United States and to deface it and to desecrate it, trying to hunt down congresspersons, male and female, with the intention of doing them harm. That's an exercise of freedom. That, they say, is an exercise of their democratic right. Chanting and telling the police, this is our capital. When they say our, we have to step back and think about that for a moment. What is meant by that? Our capital. When you have a crowd of predominantly white males carrying weapons, handcuffs, Confederate flags, Trump flags, overrunning the police and telling the police this is our capital. Well, it's the same thing as that notion of make America great again. For whom? For whom? For all Americans? I don't think so. For which Americans? Which Americans? The ones that stormed the Capitol? Well, they need to learn how to exercise their freedom with discretion so they don't make a mockery of democracy. That was a mockery. And then Ustaz Mahmoud says, a free person, this is why we need this thinking, is a person who accepts responsibility for their actions and the consequences of their actions. So when these people are then identified, we hear people that support them saying, oh, that wasn't us, that was Antifa. Those aren't Trump supporters carrying the Trump flags. Those aren't Trump supporters who marched from a rally to the Capitol. Those aren't Trump supporters. Those aren't Trump supporters saying, Donald Trump sent me. Right? Unable to now accept responsibility for their behavior. Meaning what? They are neither democratic nor free. Neither democratic nor free. So we need a concept of freedom that is nuanced and relational. And we need a methodology to make ourselves better human beings. Paulo Freire says, no one can be authentically free if they are denying the freedom of others. No one can be authentically free if they're denying the freedom of others. Ustaz Mahmoud says essentially the same thing. You have to exercise it with discretion. And in order to develop the ability to do that, the ability to not do things if you can't accept responsibility for them. Not do things if you have not thought through the consequences of them. Not do things if they harm other people. Find other methods of achieving your end. Why? So that you can promote democracy. Why? So that you can behave in a civilized manner. Why? so that you can practice the religion that you profess. So currently, America, the United States, is a great metaphor for why the second message of Islam is needed at an individual level. People need a methodology that will allow them, when they are struck on one cheek, to turn the other cheek. When somebody despitefully uses them, they do not want to retaliate. You see? So that they can, in fact, love thy God with all thy heart, with all thy soul, and with all thy mind. You need a clean mind and a calm heart and a correct perspective in order to achieve that. And this is what Islam brings, properly understood. Islam is sequentially the last monotheistic revelation. Think about that. Why has revelation ended? Stas Mahmoud says, because human beings are ready now to seek their God themselves. How? Sunnah. Or aren't there other ways to seek God? Yes, there are many other ways. As the Hindus say, many paths up the mountain. Just some of them are highways and some of them are meandering trails. Which one are you going to take? There are many paths. But the Holy Prophet Muhammad was sent explicitly, right, to be an example of moral character, and as he says, right, to help uplift the moral character of Muslims. And when I say Muslims, don't think like those people over there, if you're out there and you're not a Muslim. Now, everything on earth is a Muslim, first of all, because Muslim means being submitted to Allah. Nothing in existence is not submitted to Allah. All the laws of physics tell us that. There's a unified field. There is, you know, when the physicists talk about the magnetic field and electromagnetic field and gravity and so forth, all of those laws, they're singular, and they all tend to actually assist human beings, geared towards that anthropic principle. But I'm straying. But the notion here I wanted to say is that the notion of Islam that we're talking about here is not a faith. Stas Mahmoud says, any faith is as good as the other. If your worship is at the level of just faith, let's call it blind faith for a moment, right? Anyone's as good as the other. You're all absolutely right. You're all intolerant of other people's points of view. You see? And you have no way of solving, therefore, global problems using faith, because it's oppositional, us against them. That helps us adjust our perspective and to understand that there is only one humanity. It's obvious, but people need to really reflect on it. And if you're a monotheist, you should also understand that there is only one creator God, Allah, Yahweh, Jehovah, but one creator God. And that God, creator, who's self-determining this creation towards an end, it's not a plaything, it's not a pastime, there's a purpose for us being here, is directing it towards an end. And in that, right, we need to understand that there's only really one religion. Yes, Christianity, Judaism, Islam, Buddhism, Hinduism, Mormonism, they all look different. Because they all came at different times and places. But at the core of all of them is love thy neighbor as thyself. Treat your brother the way you want to be treated. Confucius said the same thing. The Chinese don't think of themselves as being religious, but they believe in Confucius' teachings. Confucius said, don't do to other people that which you don't want done to yourself. Well, that's just a negative statement of do unto others as you want them to do unto you. It's the same concept, just stated differently. So the religions have much more in common than they do in difference, but the perspective that's important is to understand there's only one God out there. And God did not create us for us to be continually confused. Yes, if we believe in determinism, we have to believe that God intended for there to be multiple interpretations and for there to be strife around those interpretations, but not perpetually, not eternally. The purpose of the difficulty of seeing the unity is to allow us to evolve our minds, our thinking, our emotions, so that we come to that essential reality. That's my brother. That's my sister. And this is how I should behave to them, the same way I want people to behave to me. It's not complicated. You know, all of the complication is commentary. The core of it, and what's her name? I forget. She wrote this. I've got her book here. Anyway, the core of it is treat people the way you want to be treated. The methodology for doing that is Sunnah. Ustaz also talks about the need to organize the community. And he talks about 3 principles to create the good society. Good in what sense? Good that it will provide an environment so that people can maximize the benefit of their worship and their interaction with one another. Well, what are those principles? He says they're justice. He talks about economic equality, and says that it is a form of socialism, not Marxism, not something materialistic. It's essentially humanistic and places the human being before the state. And he said that it also, the other principle is political equality. Political equality is democracy. Obviously not the democracy that stormed the Capitol. Obviously not the democracy when we just had 33 states of our 50 states to enact legislation to limit the access to the vote. 33 states just did that. That's not democracy. That's an oligarchy. That's a rule of a gang, of a group. Democracy promotes freedom. So we mean democracy in its highest sense, where it upholds human freedom and dignity. Those are 2. The third principle is social equality. Social equality, Ustaz says, is the harder of the 2 to achieve. And in a sense, it's a product of the other 2. So if we have an economic system which is regulated so that you have the basic needs of people are met, it's not difficult with the wealth of this earth to do that. But at the same time, you allow some degree of free enterprise so that people can be rewarded for their creativity and their hard work and so forth. You need that. Humans need that. So you have a combination of some of the capitalist principles like free enterprise and socialist principles. You meld those into one system that can create economic justice for human beings. You take that along with political equality, which is democracy, but democracy in the sense that it's a system that promotes human dignity, all humans, not discriminating against certain humans, not placing economic growth or political status or career ahead of the human being. The most valuable asset in a democracy are the human beings. And the human beings that have to be cared for are those that are most vulnerable in your system. If the most vulnerable in your system are not cared for, then you do not have a democracy. You have a rule of the few. Make America great again for whom? A rule of the few. But democracy is where everyone has an opportunity to self-govern themselves. It's, Ustaz says, it's a form of dignifying the human mind. The whole reason for us being here in the first place was to evolve to the point, and I said evolve, to the point, right, that we are able to self-govern. That's a glorious thing that human beings have been given, this relative freedom that we have. Once you have economic equality and political equality in place, you can move towards social equality. And Ustaz says the indication is that any one group can marry from another group. There's no pariahs. There's no groups that are stigmatized in the society. And that's important, that concept of social equality. That creates the good society. That society that is economically, politically, and socially equitable creates an atmosphere, creates a climate, creates conditions in which human beings can focus on what they're here for in the first place, which is to return to our Creator. You know, we've got a limited amount of time on this earth. We need to figure out what our purpose is and make good use of our time. Islam has been sent as the culmination of monotheistic revelation. The Quran is not only the morality of the Holy Prophet Muhammad. The Quran is descended from our Creator and represents the morality of our Creator in its absolute infinitude. That book and that prophet that revealed it, and it set the exemplary, right, method, established the exemplary method for us to follow in order to start to acquire these qualities ourselves, is the way out of our current situation. So I've said what I really came to say. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that today is Bloody Sunday. March 7th, 1965 is a day of infamy in this country. And I want to mention it because John Lewis, the congressman from Georgia, is no longer with us. And he was one of the people who was beaten trying to register people to vote. That's all they were doing. Back in 1965, you had communities in the South, Mississippi, Alabama, and elsewhere, where the majority of the citizens in the county would be African American, with 0 elected officials who were African American, because African Americans were intimidated to the point where they could not register to vote, and therefore they couldn't vote. Those few that were able to register were turned away at the polls. Bloody Sunday actually is tied to an action which was the murder of Jimmy Lee Jackson. Jimmy Lee Jackson, in February of that same year in Marion, Alabama, was murdered by police officers. This is very common in our history for people of color, African Americans, indigenous people, Latinx people, Asian people, to be killed. Muslims, Arabs, to be killed by the police. So Jimmy Lee wanted to go with his grandfather to register him to vote. his grandfather was physically, this was in 1962 when it happened, physically prevented from voting. Jimmy Lee then realized that there were some young people who were resisting the system, and he felt compelled to do it because his grandfather had been, who was frail, and his grandfather had been disrespected in this way. He became actualized, he became an activist, and in February of '65, they were throwing having a peaceful, nonviolent march at night to highlight the fact that in Marion, Alabama, Black people could not vote. They were surrounded by the police. The police then cut out all the lights on the block that they had them surrounded in. It was about 200 people. And then they attacked them. When the lights went out, a Christian minister, Black Christian minister, knelt down to pray. He was the first person the police beat. You talk about civilization. You talk about morality. You talk about religion benefiting you. How? How can you consider yourself a child of God when you beat, So this country's in need. Bloody Sunday was a response to what happened. It was a response in Selma to what happened in Marion. Marion was in February, then in Selma in March. There had been already a series of actions which led to this attempt to cross a bridge, to highlight the fact that in this democracy, so-called democracy, African Americans were denied the basic and most precious democratic right, which is the right to govern oneself. Denied it. And the state of Alabama, the governor, George Wallace, the chief of police, Jim Clark, conspired to make sure that these Black people did not gain the same rights that they gained. They looked at that process as they're trying to become superior to us. No, they weren't. They were asking for the same right that you have and you take for granted, which is the right to register to vote and exercise the vote, nothing more. When you hear the white supremacists talk about that, they now want to be better than us. That's people who are non-reflective, if they're being honest with themselves, or extremely dishonest and uncivilized. At any event, there's a movie made, Selma, and you know that Congressman John Lewis was one of the people marching across the bridge who was attacked. And it wasn't just the police. Imagine this, it's the state police, it's the local police from Selma and surrounding counties, and it's vigilantes from the white citizenry of Selma riding horses with whips and cattle prods. I'm not making this up, right? Who attacked these nonviolent people marching across there. So I just want to say, March 7th, want to take a moment to reflect on the history of this country, which has yet to be faced and yet to be resolved. But it is to the point of why I with some certainty believe that this country, though it is materially progressive, is not yet civilized and will not be civilized until it has the maturity and takes the responsibility to own its actions, takes responsibility for its actions and the consequences of its actions. As Ustaz Mahmoud said, that's what makes a free person. And we have to continue to push for that in our own ways. And with that said, I think I'll stop here and take questions should you have them.
All right, thank you so much, Dr. Ernest, for this very informative lecture. I just would like maybe to highlight 2 or 3 points until I receive questions from the audience.
Okay.
And the audience, please, you are allowed definitely to raise your hand so that we can give you the opportunity to ask your question. Or you can write your question in the chat if you are in Zoom, or you can write also your questions in the other platform, be it the Facebook or the other platform, which is YouTube. I think the point that I would like to highlight here, 3 points actually, very quickly. I'm not adding anything. I'm just very interested in the differentiation or the differentiation, yes, between morality and the materialistic world or materialistic aspect. I think the second message of Islam definitely put this very clear and indicated that the civilized person, the person who does not confuse the means with the ends, and the means are the materialistic aspect and the ends are the moral aspect. Or sacrifice, as Dr. Abdullah put it very clear, the end for the means. That means staying at the materialistic stage and not go further for the morality. The other point that Dr. Abdullah also put it forward is the notion of freedom, as Ustaz Mahmoud explained it in the second message of Islam. Not only that your freedom ends at the door of your neighbor, but he extended that the free person is do not confuse the 3 things, which is think as his thinking, of course, his or hers, his thinking, his actions, or his thinking and his saying and his action, all in harmony or in alignment. That is a very important point that Dr. Abdullah put forward. The third thing that Dr. Abdullah mentioned, that faith alone cannot solve the problem. But beyond the faith is the base, because as he mentioned, everybody happy about his or her faith. كل قوم بما لديهم فرحون. Therefore, you need an ideology that solves the problem of today's world, which is looking for peace, searching for peace. And this is what Ustaz Mahmoud put forward, explained very clearly in the second message of Islam, the 3 qualities that is required, and Dr. Abdullah also mentioned them: the political equality, which is democracy; economic equality, which is the equality between people in the matter of economics, and the byproduct or the outcome of those is the social equality, which is the second message of Islam explained that very well. I think with that, I would like to see there is a question in the chat or many questions. Let us start with, I don't know if it's a question or is a comment. All right, this is from A. Malik. She said, I realize my question might be off topic. You may disregard it, okay? We don't have off topic anything. The question could be for this topic or anything else. Should LBG be considered as a president that forgot for civil rights, or was he simply pressured by the activist of his time? I don't know, Dr. Abdullah, if...
I didn't get the question. LBJ?
LBJ, yes.
Okay.
Be considered as a president that fought for civil rights,
okay.
Or was he simply pressured by the activists of his time?
Mm-hmm. Right. Like my read on LBJ, no expert on him, is that he was like many of our presidents who, when pressure has been applied, they rose to the occasion. Before LBJ was John F. Kennedy, and John F. Kennedy himself was very reluctant to fight for civil rights because they wanted to keep the Southern Democrats at the time. At the time of the 1960s, the majority of Southerners were Democrats and not Republicans, and they were called Dixiecrats. And so the Democratic Party was always trying to cater to them and had been doing this for 100 years to try to keep them in the party. And so they would not support the civil rights or the human rights of African Americans in the South. That was the trade-off that was being made with the Democratic Party and the Dixiecrats. So Kennedy himself was very reluctant to get involved. He doesn't get involved really until the extreme protests that happened in places like Birmingham in 1963. And also he was meeting with, I think it was Khrushchev at the time. He was having détente with Khrushchev, and the Russians were using the fact that the Americans are talking out of both sides of their mouth. They're telling us that we do not respect human rights, and look how they treat their African American citizens. So Kennedy had a dual kind of motivation, but he didn't get involved in civil rights until there was pressure to do so. Same is true of Johnson. So Johnson had the example set by Kennedy late in his life. Johnson tried to pick up some of the social policies that Kennedy had endorsed. And so Kennedy is assassinated in 63. So Johnson helps pass the Civil Rights Act in 64. And then in 65, the Voting Rights Act in 65. Both of those were due to pressure. Dr. King said that himself. He says that the Civil Rights Act of 64 was from pressure put on the Kennedy administration originally in Birmingham and other cities by activists, many of them students, college students, high school students, and even elementary students were protesting in Birmingham, and thousands of them were put in jail. And then he said the Voting Rights Act of 65 under Johnson was due to the organizing that went on in 64 in places like Marion, Alabama, and Selma, Alabama, and so forth. And so, yeah, Johnson, it's the answer, I think, is both and, right? Yes, he was pressured, but he also stepped up to the plate. And I think you see in Lyndon Johnson something miraculously. He was a man of his time. He was one of the few members of Congress, the few elected officials that could have pulled off what he did. But he was a Texan. He intimidated people. He knew how to get people to do what he wanted. And he was focused on the Vietnam War. And he wanted to kind of set things straight. And so he made his famous, we shall overcome statement. He used some of the language from the civil rights movement and spoke directly to Southerners and saying, these people are asking for the same rights that you're asking for. And we need to be better as a country. So I give him credit for what he did, but it wasn't without political pressure.
All right. We have a question from the YouTube in Mabit 249. What service can Al-Fikra provide to America, considering the fact that America is majority non-Muslims?
Yeah, that's a great question. If we think about religion as more than a faith, if we think about it as an ideology and methodology that can solve our problems in the present moment, then I think you see the value of the second message of Islam, Al-Fikr Jamhuriya. Also, I had it and it slipped from me. But this idea about why it's important, it gets back to monotheism again. I think people need to Christians will have to come to grips with this, and Jews as well. Christ came and offered perspective on Judaism. He was a Jew. And he said, I came to fulfill the religion, not to change it. I am the person prophesied in your Old Testament. And this is what I'm telling you. This religion is about. It's about morality. Not about law. It's about morality. He was rejected largely. Islam came and offered perspective on Christianity. I came out of Christianity. Islam has a chapter on Miriam, the mother of Christ. A chapter on her, and recognizes her immaculate conception, and recognizes her her chastity at the same time, and recognizes her religious character, upholds it. In that chapter on Miriam, Islam establishes that Christ had his prophecy as an infant. This is nowhere in the Bible. I'm a Christian, I know that. I haven't read the Orthodox Bible, but I don't believe it's there. If it is, no one said so. Islam said that when Mary took Christ home, she was met by her brother, and at the door, he's asking her, what is this? She says, it's my child. And he starts to read her at that point. Your father's a righteous man. Your mother is not a whore. How dare you bring something to their doorstep like this? And she said, I've been asked not to speak, but for him to speak. And then the brother thought, you think this is a joke? How can this child speak? And Christ speaks. So this religion that offers that perspective should be investigated by all Christians. That's all I'm saying to them. Be intelligent and investigate. If there's nothing there for you, okay. But the reason it hasn't been investigated is because the first message of Islam was suited for the 7th century. It's not the universal message that should have appealed to Christians. Some it did appeal to, but not the majority. But the second message of Islam, which is reinterpreting the original text of Mecca, which are based on the Sunnah, the relationship between the Prophet and God, and not the relationship between the Prophet and the community of the 7th century. That needs to be looked at closely. So I just say, as a Christian, I see the perspective that Islam offers. And I think it's an intellectual endeavor. People can investigate it. And if they find that it doesn't work for them, that's their choice. If they find that something else works better for them, as Ustaz Mahmoud says, if it solves your problems better, follow that. There's no compulsion here. But I think that, I think with a proper understanding of monotheism, and at least the hypothesis that maybe these 1 billion people who are Muslims, right, have some type of legitimate claim to monotheism, investigate it. What harm does it do? Because if you investigate the thinking of Ustaz Mahmoud Muhammad Taha, it's not a faith. It's not about what I claim to be. Thinking that we are somehow better than other people because of our membership in a particular club is problematic. What's the difference between that and white supremacy? So I think people need to really think about what is how many gods are there? And what's this about a prophet coming after Christ? I think intelligent people have the compulsion, they have the responsibility to investigate. That's all I did. And when you investigate, you find things in the Quran which will surprise you. Not just the chapter on Miriam, not just the first time I ever heard Jesus speaking and saying, Inta Abdullah. He claims to be a servant of God and not God himself. And that just made sense to me, because I didn't understand if there's one, what is monotheism? We have to think about it. We have to ask ourselves that question. So that's my response.
All right, let us give the opportunity for our brother Faiz Abdul Majid. You can turn on your mic, Faiz. Go ahead, please. تفضل.
مرحبا يا فايز.
افتكر فايز طلع ولا ايش؟
Seems like it. He's gone. He'll come back.
Yeah, he didn't. Okay, let us take this question until he comes back.
Okay.
From Ziryab Jamal is asking, does the second message do away with the maximalism within the juristic tradition of Islam? If so, why is that important for the modern age?
What is this maximalist? I don't understand. What is?
I really, the question, the maximalism, I don't know, maximalism with juristic tradition. I don't.
Just have her. I don't know. I don't know what maximalism is. I don't know the term.
Yeah.
So I have to. You have to define the term, and then I will try. But I have no idea.
Yeah. Let us Riyab come back to us to explain exactly what.
Just say it in words that I can understand, sister, and then
yeah. If he can hear us, please rewrite your question, and we will give it to Dr. Abdullah.
If anybody knows, Dali, do you know maximalism?
Maximalism within the juristic tradition.
Okay, I got the heuristic. That's just the practical tradition, but I can't get the maximalism. I'm sure it's a term I should know, but I don't, sister. So say it in words, say it in a way that I can understand it, and I'll try.
Right. Let us see if Faiz is here. I think he just entered. Where are you, Faiz? You can open your mic and ask your question, Mr. Faiz. Go ahead, please.
Yes. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Abdullah. Thank you.
Marhab, ya Faiz.
Dr. Ismail.
Marhab.
How are you, Dr. Abdullah Ernest? How are you doing? And how is Linda and Sumaya?
Okay.
We are eager to hear you, of course. Abdullah. My question is, as you may be aware, Abdullah, chaos right now prevails all over. Is this a sign for the appearance of Messiah or Messiah? That is my question. Very small question. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Did you understand what I'm saying?
Give me an idea a little bit more. What's the sign? Is what the sign?
Chaos and instability.
Okay.
All over the world. You see that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well,
in Sudan, in all countries, I see that.
All right, Faiz, I'll answer it like this. I have to be humble. I don't know, but let's start with that. And then I think, if you look at history, I teach history, throughout time, people have predicted like the coming of Christ throughout time. Because, there'll be wars and there'll be rumors of wars and there'll be chaos and people will say, these are the signs. And so I really do think we have to be careful because people have been predicting that for hundreds of years, right? The second coming. So I think we have to be careful. However, I would I would say we have to factor in also the destructive power of nations. And I've said this before. Currently, we have nations on this earth that are nuclear and immoral, uncivilized. They're nuclear and they're immoral. And so that's dangerous. And that threatens us more directly than anything other than maybe the climate warming up. So that nuclear threat, I think, makes me feel like more like the time, I hope the time is close. Because if you look at, just take the United States, take the fact that almost half the country, the voters in the country, supported the other guy, right? To me, that's not a good sign. To me, that's an indication of real problems at an economic, at a political, and at a social level in this society, which thinks it's a democracy because people claim their democracy and wave their flags. People think they're free and grab the flag and then hits a policeman over the head with it to exercise their freedom. So I would say, Faiz, I feel like you feel that the time is likely, approaching. And I look at this nation with all of its potential, a microcosm of the world, every race represented, with a beautiful constitution, though a tortured history. But the potential for this society to set an example has been demonstrated over time. At our best, the United States is an exemplary example and has done a lot of good at our best. But when we behave in an immoral, uncivilized, unchristian manner, with all our power, we are one of the greatest threats, like Dr. King said, one of the greatest threats to peace on earth. And so I'm concerned, and the reason that I believe the ideas of Ustaz Mahmoud are so important is because that good community that he talks about is a community that can help bring peace by starting with peace within the self. It's very difficult for people who are not at peace with themselves, not at peace with their neighbors, not at peace with people who are different from them, living in their same community and country, to promote peace in the world. So that methodology of the Prophet, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, of cleaning the mind, calming the heart, and becoming more responsible in our exercise of our freedom, and moving closer to what our Creator intends for us, what our Creator's will is, that I believe is the solution. And I do believe it's time sensitive. I happen to believe, and this is a belief, that if human beings do not evolve in a timely manner, we'll be replaced by a more intelligent version of ourselves that will. And history suggests that there have been a lot of dead ends to get up to us, right? Neanderthal is a very recent example of that. Okay, so that's me. That's my belief, Vice. Not sure.
All right. Okay, let us go back to Ziryab's Jamal question, the one that has
I get it. Yeah, so that maximalist is talking about, I call those absolutists,
yes,
right? And that's that term. People who think in absolute terms. They also believe that there's this cosmic battle going on. You know, there's good against evil, and they represent good. And absolute good is the way that they see the world and the version of reality that they promote. And many times this person can be identified as a fundamentalist. They're not fundamentalists, right? Fundamentalists are people like Ustaz Mahmoud, in the sense that he gets back to the fundamentals of Islam, which is essentially aligning ourselves with the will of God through adoption of the personal practice of the Holy Prophet Muhammad. That's the fundamentals of our religion. But we call them fundamentalists, they're absolutists, they're maximalists. Yes, those folks. And I think the question might have been, can we move?
If I can read it to you again. Does the second message do away with the maximalism within the juristic tradition of Islam?
Yes.
If so, why is that important for the modern age?
So my understanding is yes. The second message of Islam is not going to compel anybody to be anything. We respect the dignity of human beings to decide for themselves what they want to believe and how they want to practice it. What we suggest is that we're governed by a constitution, and people have to follow the laws of the constitution. But under that, as long as they're not breaking the law and harming other people, they're free to think what they want. They're free to practice any faith that they want. And no one is going to be free to impose their will violently on any other human being, period. In the name of God or in the name of anything else. No. Human beings are, as Ustaz says, ends in themselves. We are the end. We are the reason for this whole creation. The physicists are telling us that. That's what I was trying to get at. But the anthropic principle, look it up. That this entire planet, which appears like a jewel in the universe when you compare it to even our own solar system, was designed specifically to support human life. And if you tinker with anything, just slightly, the constants just slightly, the electromagnetic field dissolves, the gravity, everything starts flying around in space, the oceans freeze. Just small adjustments. Somehow, right? This planet has evolved to a point in time and space that it is perfect for the promotion of human life. But again, humans have to become more conscious and more intelligent in exercising their freedom and not pollute this pristine planet that was inherited by our ancestors. We will need to take care of this environment, because it is the environment created in God's mind through his will for us, so that we can get on our journey of self-realization to return to the garden, to return to the presence. And that's an individual journey. It's not a group journey. Everybody has to take responsibility for their own progress along that journey. Some people can help others along. I look at Ustaz Mahmoud as a person who came to help us along, because this interpretation of the second message of Islam coincides with the highest notions of human freedom and dignity and justice. God, what more do we need? Let's investigate. Let's take a look at it, right? If we find something better, follow that. There's a lot of great ideologies out there, but we have to remember that from a Muslim standpoint, right? the Quran, that the Prophet was established as the highest moral character. His morality was the Quran, and the Quran descends from our Creator. That's the belief system of Muslims. Should all that be true, we really need to examine his moral character more closely, distinguish the Sunnah from the Sharia of the 7th century, and then begin to investigate the value of adhering to it. So yes, you're exactly right. We have to move beyond absolutism and maximalism, because they are consistent with the period of guardianship, where certain people in the community felt that they were responsible for other people, and they assert their interpretation and their will on them as if they're children. We're adults. We're adults. We can decide for ourselves. What we need to do is have a moral code. And that moral code needs to not be individual. It needs to be the entire civilization, you see. The civilization needs to be moral. And that is going to require a restructuring of it. Capitalism doesn't take us there. We need something closer to socialism. Calling ourselves democratic and not behaving in a free and decent manner towards one another is not going to take us there. The social inequality that exists in this society, say, as perpetuated by the police. I gave you the example of the governor of Alabama and the chief of police in Selma, and you can find that in 2021 around this country. Social equity, social equality will take us there. Being divided against one another based on our gender, our sexual orientation, our class, our race, our religion, our region of the country, our accent, all of those divisions need to be overcome. They're trivial and meaningless in the end of the day. None of that hatred is going to, and division is going to benefit anyone. People need to figure out how to get about the purpose that we were created for in the first place and descended to this earth for in the first place. Okay.
All right. We have a number of questions. Let me start with Mansour Ahmed. Please, can you talk a bit about the act of Muslims today and the principle of Islam?
Muslims today.
Thanks.
Ustaz Mahmoud, I don't know anything that I didn't learn from Ustaz Mahmoud about religion, honestly. I mean, I might have known a few things, but he says, the only Muslim at the time of the Prophet was the Holy Prophet Muhammad. Everybody else was a mu'min, a believer. And he lived according to a standard that was not obligatory on other people at the time. That's the Sunnah that we want to call people back to. Muslims today are not living the Sunnah. Muslims today, Christians today, Jews today, and most human beings today are not saying what they think, doing what they say. They're not. People are saying one thing and doing something else. So religion today, Muslims and right across the board, has not helped to improve the morality of human beings. This is the stats. If your religion is not improving your morality, is not making you a better human, is not making you more civilized and capable of living amongst other humans, what's the value of it? So I ask Muslims, they have to ask themselves that question, are you walking your talk? Right? And is your understanding and practice of Islam making you a better person? Not just in front of people, but a better person, right? In private and in public, day and night. 24 hours a day. That is the goal, right? No one's claiming that we've achieved it, but we're saying that the level of behavior that Islam is calling people to is sublime. We're talking about following the example that God established as the example. We're talking about understanding and having insight into revelation, right? That is identified as the culmination of monotheistic revelation. So that's a high order. And I don't see it being practiced in general by any religion that I know of. All of them, when you get down to it, can surprise you and disappoint you. And just like we're surprised and disappointed in ourselves sometimes, it's part of being human. We do need methodologies to help us evolve. We do need discipline and methodologies to help us evolve. Just calling myself something. See, let me just say this now, because one of the pitfalls of Islam, and that's why I equated people who just identify themselves and label themselves and then think that they're safe, and they might as well be white supremacists. Just because you're, say, born a Christian or a Muslim or you converted to it, just the name itself is insufficient. That's just surface. That's just a word. That's just your tongue. What is your behavior? What is your thought process? What is your speech? What is your behavior? That's what identifies you as being moral or not moral.
All right. Let me just thank Malaz Mubarak for providing the definition of maximalism. Thank you in the chat. We have a question here from Al-Malih Ali. He said, "Hi, Prof. I heard that Ustaz Mahmoud said Al-Fikra Al-Jamhuriya will spread in Sudan and USA next to it, and then India. Being an American, did you feel it is going to happen soon?"
I think it's possible for it to. I think America has some the stats one time said to me, America's material greatness is an expression of its spiritual greatness. And he said that to me one time. I started to think about it a little bit differently. So there is something unique about this country, but I see it as its potentiality. But it's there on paper in the Constitution. There's something special in its protection of individual rights and individual freedom, and it's important that it values and protects the dignity of human beings in its laws, but they're not being practiced fairly and equitably. Not all people's rights are protected, but there's still something there. So I would just say, Dr. King put it, I think, as clearly as it can be put. What we're asking for is America to be true to what it put down on paper. So that's it. If it did that, then the sky's the limit for this country, its potential. Because if material progress is the base, we've got that, right? The height of civilization that can be attained from this country is tremendous. And I think that's what Ustaz Mahmoud's talking about, right? The base is expansive, it's massive. And the spirit of this nation that comes to the surface from time to time in our leaders and in individuals within our population is amazing. Dr. King is an amazing human being. Malcolm X was an amazing human being. Ida B. Wells, amazing. You can go back into the history and see these people that have come onto the scene, you know, that are there now and historically, that suggests there's potential for this country. There's possibility for this country. I do believe in that, yes. And if Ustaz said India, then India as well. Because one of the things I say about Ustaz Mahmoud, when has he been wrong? you gotta search to answer that question. When was he wrong? Look at what he said everywhere else and how it's come to pass, like about the Sudan, about Sharia law dividing the Sudan into, yeah, and then we've got now 2 Sudans. I mean, he was saying that very early, and very consistent. So I think his insight has played out over time for me up until this point. An example would be, even he talked about the USSR and how it was the greatest threat to religion because it was materialistic and it had this very organized ideology that was stronger than the Western world. And when the Berlin Wall fell and people were saying there's only one power now, the Western power, the United States, and Russia is this little marginalized country, then we see how that ideology led those people to reassert themselves on the world, excuse me, on the world stage in a manner that almost took us down. I mean, the puppetry that they performed with our former president is an example, but they're meddling in all over Western Europe, and they're powerful and they're dedicated to undermining Western democracies. Look at their goal. For what? Why? Not as if they're doing it for the good of humanity. They're doing it because they can, and they're frustrated because they have nothing to offer as an alternative. That's my interpretation. So I hope that answered the question.
All right. There is a comment here, and I think it is worth to just read it, and you can comment on it. From Yasir An-Naw, he said, or he wrote, the way Ustaz Mahmoud approached his ideas is more far to many people to understand it fully. Although the language he used is simple, but the intellectual idea inside is so deep and amazing.
Yes, I agree. And his name was?
Yasir An-Naw.
Yasir An-Naw. You're exactly right, Yasir. I was reading the second message of Islam, Peace on Civilization, just in preparation for this. And it's the first, and I've read it, I don't want to tell you how many times, but I've read it through several times. I used to just read it cover to cover. That was my real access to his thinking, was the translation by Dr. Abdullah Ahmed Naim into English. And anyway, I was just reading it recently, and it's the first time I really understood that piece about the means to the end, where he said that, you know, people who are truly civilized do not sacrifice the means to the end, right? For the end. Yeah, I didn't put that all together in my head and understand it as clearly until today, even though I've probably read it lots of times. And so one of the things about Ustaz Mahmoud is, like you say, he's extremely clear. And this is because he, in my mind, as intellectual as he was, he's an engineer, and a brilliant engineer, and a brilliant person to have become one under that British system. He's brilliant, right? That's not how he presents himself. He presents himself as this humble, simplistic man standing before you, concerned about you, right? And when he speaks in an Arabic that's accessible to everybody, right? And his ideas, however, are profound. So I think in many ways, his greatness is his ability to not only simplify very complex problems, but also to convey them in a manner that is accessible to anybody who cares to investigate them. However, like you say, they're so profound that even though you think you have it, there's always more to get.
Okay. We have Muhammad here in Zoom with us. He said, thanks for the invaluable lecture, Dr. Ernest. And his question is, within the concept of one's exercising their individual freedom, what is the justification of hudud in Islam? Since individuals enter into whatever action with consent. Example, prohibition of same-sex relationships.
Yeah, if I understand the question, it's a great question. Well, we have to think of human beings as just like human society, right? It develops and we develop. And so if you think of hudud in the terms of just like execution, right? There was a time when human beings executed one another for what we would consider to be very trivial violations in our development. And we've evolved to the point now where people can really start having conversations about whether or not executions are even needed in society. But this is a recent evolution. And so if you think about Islam coming 1400 years ago, hudud was kind of necessary. I mean, if you think about the behavior, the way in which people problem solved 1400 years ago, I mean, warfare was relished. People can define themselves as warriors. That was for males in particular, but even females participated in warfare. But for males, in many of our traditional cultures, they're warrior cultures. That's what you did. So killing people, that was just what you had to do in order to survive and in order to establish yourself in the world. We have evolved from a more primitive state. And in that state, hudud made sense 1400 years ago. I'm not so sure that it's necessary in the 21st century. That's debatable, right? So I think the notion that human beings are created for a purpose, yet we still have severe punishment when they violate certain laws, that's been there from the very beginning. It's part of the impetus for our evolution. Start with Adam. Adam could have been placed in Jannah, heaven, without the tree, without the apple, right? But the law was established through what was forbidden to Adam. Adam violated the law and was forced out of that lofty state, and here we are. But that was a severe punishment for eating the apple. I don't think it was really an apple. We think it was probably relationships with Eve, and he was trying to cover himself now, and he's ashamed and so forth. But the point is, he broke the law and suffered the punishment. And if you look at early history, look at the Bible as an example, or the Quran, or the Bhagavad Gita, and you look at the killing that just routinely went on. Even the prophets killed people, right? We can start to understand that we can't necessarily think of our moment in time and use it as a vantage point to evaluate practices historically. We have to place ourselves in that historical moment and ask ourselves, in this moment, was there a value that was being upheld? Was there a rationale for the behavior? And I think if you do that, you see Hudud has wisdom. It had a role. And one of the roles is for us, I believe, to reach this point where we look at it and we feel that it is egregious. And most Muslims I know feel that. Now you have those that are advocating to reinstate Islam by reinstating the law of the 14th century. They're stuck with it. And many of them have, I'm thinking of like ISIS and Boko Haram and those kind of people. I mean, there's no bottom to the type of behavior that those folks engage in. And we are abhorred by it because we're evaluating it on the sensibilities of the 21st century, right? They're not all barbaric, evil people. Some of them, particularly the soldiers and stuff, are just mistaken about the notion of how Islam is applicable in the present moment. It's not applicable by taking a law that was perfect for 1400 years ago and forcing it on today. It's applicable because it is flexible. There's always a zahir, a clear surface interpretation, and a batin, a deeper hidden meaning in the Quran throughout Mathaniya. There's duality. And it's in that duality that Ustaz has identified the second message of Islam. It's in the Quran, yet it was presented in a way that people didn't understand it, and it was not binding on them historically. But the principles are still there. But we need to follow them. We can talk about why that is later. But I hope that answered your question.
Well, thank you. We have a question also in Zoom here from Malaz Mubarak. Although she said, if I could please have this question answered possibly toward the end to not drift the topic. But I think her question is in the center of this lecture, and it is very related. So I'm going to read the question, and Dr. Abdullah, you can go ahead and answer it. She asked, as someone that knows almost nothing about the Republican thought and not that fluent in Arabic, where would you recommend me to start in order to learn more? I have already ordered the book in English, The Second Message of Islam. However, what other avenues should I access?
What was her name?
Malaz Mubarak.
Malaz Mubarak. Marhab. Great question. Malazim, I would say if you can speak Arabic or you want to access it in English, the website alfikra.org is an excellent resource. On it, you'll find it's very well organized, and there are books and articles by Ustaz, about Ustaz. There are his lectures, a series of his lectures in Arabic and in English, and a wealth of other information. His history, there's a very nice historical piece there. So I would say, in addition to the second message of Islam, that would be an excellent source. There's also some books that have been written by various students and historians and professors of law that are either about Ustaz or about his thinking. I found just recently they're teaching classes at Columbia University about his ideas, UCLA, different places I run into people who have heard about his thinking. And so if you Googled his ideology, his thinking, you're going to find a wealth of articles. If you access in Arabic, I say some of the writings of Abdullah Bashir recently, some of his wonderful research that he's done is amazing in documenting the history of Ustaz. So those are some of the places I'd say.
Great. I would like also maybe to share with Malaz alfikra.org, as you can see here in the that I'm sharing on the screen. There is an English part. She said she is not fluent in Arabic. That's why she's asking you. So definitely you can find some books and some these are all these in English, so that you can definitely be able. It is alfikra.org, as you can see here. And also I think Omar Hawari already put it in the chat. You can copy it from the chat. And also in alfikra.org, we have place that you can, if I go to home, let me just show you exactly also a place where you can write your comments and your questions. And we definitely, here in the guest book, you can write your questions, and we would definitely go back to you. And if you want to leave also your maybe email address or something like that, we can definitely communicate with you.
Yeah, Ismail,
so,
I'm sorry.
Yes, go ahead, Dr.
No, I was just saying there's really a great set of lectures in here. I think it must be under talks. I usually now listen to it in Arabic, but I think it's either under talks or under articles. But it's the the series from 1977. This is excellent. I really do think it's helped me a lot. I accessed a lot of new information by these translated lectures in English right there. So I would say that's a good place to start as well.
Okay, good. All right. I think we reach the end of the questions according to the list I have received. Unless there is anybody in the in any of the platform has a question to send. Otherwise, we will give the mic. Thank you again, Malaz. She said also, thank you very much. I appreciate that. Thank you too. Yes, and so the mic back to you, Dr. Abdullah Ernest, to maybe to have the final comment, and we can finish also with the Laylat al-Qadr. We can also present it from here.
Okay,
if you
wonderful.
Want. Okay, go ahead.
Well, yeah, thank you folks that attended and being so patient, and I hope that you got something useful out of the time that you spent here. And again, everybody that was involved in putting this on, Ismail, Abdul Hajj, Omar, Ashari, thank you. Sheikh Faiz, thank you for attending. Sheikh Dali, Ustaz Dali, thank you so much for being here. It means a lot to see you folks. And yeah, I hope that we have a chance to do this in the future. And if people have questions that they weren't able to formulate here, then maybe that you can send them. Is there a place they can send them, Ishmael? I can give my personal email, or they can send them.
If they can put them in fikra.org, the notes, there is a place for people to ask questions.
Okay.
And if these questions are directed to you, we can send it to you.
Great. I would appreciate that.
Is that okay?
Yes.
All right.
Thanks again. Everybody enjoy their Sunday. I think the president is going to speak today, President Biden, on Bloody Sunday, if I'm not mistaken. He might say a few words on it, so you might want to check that out. And
all right, then again. we are going to end or نختم بليلة القدر بصوت الأستاذ.
Perfect.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. إنا أنزلناه في ليلة القدر وما أدراك ما ليلة القدر. ليلة القدر خير من 1000 شهر. تنزل الملائكة والروح فيها بإذن ربهم من كل أمر سلام هي حتى مطلع الفجر. صدق الله العظيم.
صدق الله العظيم. وشكرا جزيلا لكل الحضور. I hope that we can see you again in our meetings, either with Dr. Abdullah or with Dr. Dali. We have a weekly meeting. We call it Rukun. Every week on Fridays. It is 7 o'clock Khartoum time. That means 11 o'clock, I believe. Is that 11? Yes, 11 o'clock Eastern time in the United States. So welcome and thank you for being here, and goodbye, everyone.
Shukran alaikum.